I'm a geologist by training, but my heart led me to become a ranger in the southeast United States. The serenity of the wilderness, the whispering pines, the untouched beauty of nature, it was all I ever wanted. But as time passed, the isolation grew on me. My only company was the occasional visitor and the memories of my college days. Of course, we all have the typical ranger riffraff, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't make at least a few friends. I'm a bit of an introvert, so a majority of the ranger types that I met reminded me a little bit of frat boys. I did find some folks I like to hike and fish with, but for the most part, I did my duties and spent a lot of time alone. I worked in the field for about 20 years in total. One day about a decade ago, an elderly couple caught my eye. They were not your typical tourist. There was a certain familiarity in their eyes, a kind of longing. They were from out west, visiting the park they'd gotten engaged in many moons ago. They were searching for a particular spot, a fragment of their past, encapsulated in a photograph. But age and time had reshaped the landscape, so they were kind of lost. Moved by their story, I offered to help them. We pored over the photographs, their wrinkled hands pointing out landmarks, their voices trembling with anticipation. I escorted them in my vehicle, the silence punctuated by their soft whispers and crunching of gravel underneath the tires. We hiked the last stretch, the forest echoing with the rustle of leaves underneath our feet. When I say I escorted them, I mean they followed along in their Toyota 4Runner. There was no way I was going to help these city slickers way out into the wilderness, only for them to have no way of getting back. They had boots and a 4x4, enough to tell me they took off-road travel seriously, but I was still pretty cautious about how far I would take them in. It was still early in the afternoon and my duties were finished for the day, so I spent an hour or so bumping around the backside of a basin along the river, as I knew their location had to be near this area. The rock, the trees, the way the earth dipped away in the photo, this area had all the kinds of stuff that it needed. It was a dead ringer, so I knew I had to be close. And sure as sunrise, I ended up being right. I literally nailed it. We parked our rigs and hiked down the short ravine that took us very near the water's edge. And right down there in this earthy little pocket looked exactly like what they showed me in the photographs. I got down first, helped out the wife next, and then the husband. And they were over the moon. We found the spot, a picturesque bend along the river, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. I left them there, two silhouettes against the dying light, a picture of timeless love. It's beautiful to me that they made such a trip, not just the miles over the land, but through the very envelope of time itself. They were out here to satisfy their younger devotions of love. I know it all sounds silly, but this was the kind of affection that swayed me to be a ranger. Affection for the land, for mankind, for every fleeting moment in between all that. It's bleeding heart drivel, but it's how I feel. As I returned to my station, a strange unease gripped me. I couldn't tell you why, but something was just off. They explained it clear as day. They wanted to share an afternoon in that old area, retake some photos and all that good stuff. For the most part, pretty typical visitor activity. For whatever reason though, the vibe of that old couple just carried a different energy. So by the time I got back to my post, I convinced myself that I somehow had fucked up. I should have never taken those folks out there. As a park ranger, you can imagine that's a poor feeling to have, like you failed to do your job. I decided to wait for them, to ensure that they would leave safely. Night fell, and the park was bathed in this eerie silence. The other day trippers trickled out like sand through an hourglass, but as the closing hour approached, all the traffic choked off into nothing, not even a straggler headlight bumping along in the distance. I called to the other check stations in the area and got vague reports, but nobody could confirm that an elderly couple had exited in a Toyota 4Runner. The couple hadn't left. I could feel it in my goddamn bones. Never since that day have I had such a gut feeling like that, anxiety gnawing at me. I left my assistant at the entrance station and retraced the drive I took back into the canyon. There wasn't a soul, save for a couple of overnight campers that we already knew about, as they had the proper permits and paperwork. I bumped along until I got to the drop down, and there I saw the 4Runner just sitting there in the dark. It was eerie and made me start to sweat. I actually remember my mouth getting over-salivated, like my glands were about to go haywire and I was about to throw up. Fingers shaking beyond belief, I shifted into park and killed the engine, but left the headlights on. It was dark out there. I knew I was going to need help. All the help I could get finding them. I hiked down to the ravine, lost my nerve, just kind of waited there for a minute. Their car was here, so I knew what I was about to find. Probably something bad. I called out a few times, hoping maybe I'd be wrong. They just got a little off course, or maybe couldn't make the short climb back up to the car. Only silence answered me though. So I manned up and finished the descent down to the shore of the river. The sight that greeted me was as beautiful as it was horrifying. The moonlight helped me out a bit. I could see some forms sprawled out in the dirt below a tree, legs pointed toward the water. It looked like I maybe even disturbed them, as if they were just bundled up, cuddling beneath the endless stars overhead. "Hey, Ranger District here," I called out softly. They didn't move. I took a quaking breath and lit the scene up with my flashlight. There they lay, spooning on the riverbank, motionless, their faces serene. A sense of finality hung in the air. They were both dead, but they didn't look scary or miserable. It was the weirdest thing coming up on them like that, and having that premonition earlier like this would be their fate. They clearly weren't murdered. This was some kind of planned suicide by the look of it. I seriously doubted they both dropped dead of strokes or heart attack at the exact same time. I called the cops, my mind in a whirlwind of confusion and sorrow. The following hours were a blur of flashlights, hushed conversations, and deep, overwhelming sadness. The police disclosed their identities, but little else than that. It was only later on that I learned the heartbreaking truth of the matter. The wife was terminally ill, her life slowly being claimed by cancer. They'd chosen to end their lives together, in the place where their journey had begun. That news hit me hard, but I found solace in the thought that they were at peace, together in death as they had been in life. They hadn't asked for help because they didn't want to implicate anyone else. Their final act was a testament to their love, a love so profound that they chose to embrace death at a place etched in their memory, under the vast, indifferent sky. Their story, though tragic, touched me deeply. It was a stark reminder of the transience of life and the enduring power of love. As I walked the trails of the park, under the towering trees and along the winding river, I'll always remember them. Two souls who found their final resting place in the corner of the world that they loved, leaving behind a story that echoes in the silence of that wilderness. I'm not a forester, but I have a tale that's bound to send shivers down your spine. It involves my cousin, who is a forest ranger in the Montana-Wyoming area, and a particular discovery that we made deep in the heart of the wilderness. My cousin, a hydrologist by training, often ventured into the remote corners of the forest to test streams and snow runoff for contaminants. The idea of accompanying her on one of these expeditions seemed kind of thrilling, so I did decide to join her. We packed all our gear into saddlebags, preparing to camp out in the wilderness for 2 nights. Now obviously my cousin did this regularly by trade. She was tough as nails and didn't bat an eye at the notion of sleeping in the middle of nowhere, all by herself. It was just part of the job for her. I grew up camping and roughing it too, so you could say I was in my element as well. Still, there was something about the isolation that just had me on edge. We were going to be very far from anywhere, and no help would be anywhere nearby. No family, no nothing. It was just her and I, and miles of treacherous woodland. The first day was nothing short of magical. The scenery was breathtaking, the air so pure it was almost intoxicating. The tranquility of the wilderness was a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of the city life. I fell in love with that area instantly, wishing that I could visit more often. That first day, though, was all business, so it was split into 2 different activities. The first half of the day was mostly getting her work done, which involved a lot of back and forth trail walking, lots of backtracking, and we had to take the samples back to camp. She kept this absolutely massive hard case that seemed almost indestructible. We had to keep all the samples in. Once she was satisfied and had shown me all the ins and outs of her job, she took me around sightseeing from all the beautiful lookout points. The day was eventually over though, with the rippling sunset lighting the way as we hiked back to our camp. It was like being in a movie, just so out there, well beyond people, cars, civilization. Some of the trails were so thin and spare, and I thought they probably weren't even for humans. My cousin utilized a network of game trails that was well up the side of the mountain. We cozied up into camp, had this splendid dinner of sandwiches and Cheetos, even some pasta salad that we kept in a small cooler. Everything was excellent. My cousin took the time to give me even more information on the area. I was right. Very little recreation went on up here. No engines, no cars, no off-roaders. This was a cool little slice of wilderness that people just didn't explore that often. It was always quiet, but there was evidence of some traffic, some old and some new. She said sometimes she would find shell casings way out in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes there would be rusted ones. Other times there would be brand new shiny brass. Very weird, but not so weird that it kept her up at night. Tomorrow will be a fun day. We'll pack up camp and then I'll take you around to the old haunts, she explained. Something weird I want to show you, and I think you'll dig it. With that, we turned in for the night, went to bed. I had visions in my head of what weird stuff might be in store for me tomorrow. On the second day, my cousin turned to me with this mischievous glint in her eye. "You want to see it now?" she asked, intrigued, and I nodded. We finished up with our camp chores, and then my cousin did something I've never seen her do before. She got a shoulder pack, just a single sling setup, built it with all kinds of unique equipment, namely some rope, a flashlight, a first aid kit, this big knife, and a little black pistol I didn't even know she had. She said it was a 9mm Beretta, and she took it everywhere in the wild with her. With that, she led us off in a direction that we hadn't gone yet, down into this ravine that further led into a gulch. It was almost like someone had dug a trench along the side of a mountain. A part I failed to mention at the beginning of this story was that my cousin had hauled some horses out with her for this particular job. She used them for some of the more distant locations that she needed to test water in. I personally wasn't much of a rider, so she had me saddle up behind her, and she took us across the mountain face on her best horse. At the end of the secluded fold in the land, we dismounted our horse and tied him up in this picturesque clearing. My cousin then instructed me to follow this narrow wildlife path, then handed me our rechargeable radio. It was this little compact device, capable of being wound up for power and doubling as a lantern if need be. This was her way of telling me to look alive and stay alert without getting me creeped out. If she was handing me equipment, I knew that we were in a deep, isolated part of the wilderness, where predators might lurk, and who knows, maybe something worse. I scanned the area and followed her instructions. As I ventured down the path, I stumbled upon a sight that was utterly out of place in the middle of this wilderness. A large coil of wire, similar to the 10 or 12 gauge wiring used in houses. It was protruding from the ground. I stopped, completely dumbfounded. How the hell could this be out here? And then it hit me. This must be what my cousin was talking about. The weird, creepy thing that she was going to show me. I felt a mix of uncertainty and disappointment, as I was kind of expecting something way bigger and scarier. I realized it probably wasn't even attached to anything, so I grabbed the wire and pulled. To my surprise, it was so firmly inserted into the earth that it didn't even give me an inch. I dug into the soil a bit, found that the wire entered a tube that sheathed it from rocks and other things that could damage it. It was in the moment that I knew that this cord actually went somewhere, but being on the side of a mountain, I have no idea where that somewhere could be. "What do you think?" my cousin asked as she came up behind me. "Really, really weird. Do you have any idea where it goes?" "Nope, none of us do. Some of the other rangers told me I'd find this out here. I didn't think anything of it until I found the desk. It's gotta be a hoax of some kind, right? Probably some old joke from when crews were running power lines through here." My cousin nodded and then shrugged. Then she told me a story. The wire wound its way through the underbrush, strung across tree limbs, snaked around rocks, and finally terminated into an outlet mounted on the side of a desk. The desk, reminiscent of the old ones from my school days, stood alone in the wilderness. No chair, no building, nothing else, just a lone desk with a live outlet. Confused and curious, I watched as my cousin plugged the radio into the outlet. To our astonishment, the radio lit up and began blaring static. Despite being miles away from civilization with no road access, buildings, or people, we found a live outlet. The wire was being fed from somewhere, a source unknown and unseen. It was an enigma, a lone power desk in the middle of the woods. I really regret not taking a picture of it, for it was a sight as eerie as it was inexplicable. Now, when my cousin first got this job, the other rangers told her she'd find a live cable out there. When she went out to take samples for the very first time, like 2 or 3 years prior, she found the cable and followed it to the desk. When she mentioned the desk to her colleagues, they all laughed as if she was making it up, but she wasn't. She even had photos to prove it. The other rangers were so blown away, they all planned to hike out there together just to see the thing for themselves. Sure enough, it was still there, as it was on the day we walked out to it. No spooky jump scares, no hidden bodies, just this one inexplicable anomaly in the heart of the wilderness. It was this stark reminder that even in the most serene and picturesque settings, there are mysteries that defy explanation, stories that unsettle us, remind us of the inexplicable world that we live in. I wonder who carved that, I asked to her, pointing to the surface of the desk. There in the blotchy wood grain, a message had been chiseled. It said, "Go away for good," in big bold print, meticulously etched to be crystal clear. My cousin leaned over to take a look as I watched all the color drain from her face. She said that hadn't been there before. She had just done this area 3 months before this. She'd never seen anyone else in the area, ever, in her years with the Forest Service. We lingered there for a bit, listened to the woods and watched for anyone around. Nothing stirred though. She radioed into her office and let them know that she was finished, where she was at, and when to be expecting her back. The sudden call into headquarters told me for sure that something weird was now going on. We made the long slog off the mountain, horses and equipment intact, until we linked up with a truck and trailer and then rumbled our way back to civilization. We started to see campers, hikers, fishermen along the creek. They all waved and smiled, happy to see a peacekeeper so far out in the sticks. I had this weird thought though, about that desk sitting up in that gully, all those miles up in the mountain. I imagined someone sitting there, watching all the tourists use the wreck sites in the forest below. It reminded me of the TV show Lost or something of the sort. We made it back without an issue, and my cousin and I never spoke of it again. She still works for the Forest Service, but has moved on to other areas in the state. I'm sure it's still sitting up there though, surging with power for no reason at all. And that, dear listeners, is the end of today's tale. A lone desk, a live outlet, and a wilderness that holds secrets we may never unravel. Until next time, but remember, not all is as it seems when you venture into the heart of the wilderness. I'm not a ranger, but my past isn't far off. I was part of a group akin to the Scouts that will remain anonymous, a band of adventurers who spent countless hours in the embrace of the woods. The wilderness was our playground, our classroom, our home. We definitely encountered our fair share of oddities, strange occurrences that would send chills down your spine, but most had a rational explanation. Yet there was this one incident, one chilling memory that still haunts me, a night of terror that remains etched in my mind. My job title wasn't camp ranger, but I was in charge, seasonally, of different kind of groups of kids, usually between the ages of 8 and 16. We ran this big facility deep in the woods, so it took a lot of people to keep everything safe and smoothly operating. There were a lot of moving parts to places like this, as you never know what some kid might find or do. Plus, there are local trailblazers and people running amok in the woods, so we have to be vigilant about who comes and goes off of our property. As a leader for the 8 to 10-year-old age group, I was responsible for their safety, their learning, and more importantly, their fun. We went on a camping trip, a yearly tradition, a time of bonding and adventure. This year was different though. It was our first time on this new terrain, a vast expanse of wilderness that stretched as far as the eye could see. Usually, we would scout out the entire area before the kids would arrive, marking out any potential hazards and mapping escape routes. But by this time, the sheer size of the place made it practically impossible to do. The facility itself was pretty luxurious. Everyone slept in log cabins. We had a mess hall, running water, all of that good stuff. The camping trips were different though. The rangers and the team leaders would get their groups together, pack everything they would need for the weekend on their backs, and then buck out into the middle of nowhere. This is where the true camping came into play. We could actually teach the kids how to rough it. Every camp has its own traditions, but ours was no different. We had the night game, a thrilling, terrifying activity where the kids had to complete tasks while we, the leaders, dressed as monsters, lurked in the shadows, ready to jump out and scare them. This camp was no exception to that. As the sun set and darkness crept in, we donned our monstrous disguises and hid in those woods, lying in wait for the near checkpoints. I remember there was a part of me that thought this was a bad idea. Like I mentioned, we really hadn't surveyed the area too thoroughly. This made me think the night game and antics might not be such a good idea. The last thing that we needed was someone to fall off some unbeknownst cliff face or stumble into a mountain lion's den while searching for wood. This was a big plateau on the south side of the facility that had only recently been made available after a big logging session had cleared this usable path into the area. Still, we decided to continue on with our normal activities. We had a radio, first aid, and some basic levels of protection like machetes and a flare gun. I had a belt knife, and I wore it everywhere, even to the bathroom. Unfortunately, there were no real firearms, so no real security. If anything went down, the adults had to protect the kids at any cost, and that's what we were told. In the midst of the game, I found myself in this open stretch of the forest, a place with sparse foliage, perfect for a chase. The trees were the only hiding spots, and using a flashlight was out of the question. Its beam would clearly give away my position. The darkness was unsettling, the kind that toys with your senses, making you think you see things that aren't actually there. As I stood there, a shadow flitted past me several times. It was roughly my size, but I couldn't make out any other details. I dismissed it as an animal, but I just couldn't shake that feeling, you know? Back across the clearing, I could see the troop of kids getting ready to make their way over to me. My plan was to hop out at the first kid that passed me, chase the rest of them backward, and hopefully cut off the kid in the lead, wherein I'd really scare the shit out of him. Looking back, I got a little too much joy out of the night games and those spooky activities. Mostly because it was a free pass to truly make these kids afraid. Call me mean, whatever, but it was a good time. As they started to come across the field though, something spooked them and they went darting back the way they came. I was stumped, wondering what could have caused them to turn around. As I got ready to move out from my hiding place, that same shadow from earlier passed by once more, but this time I got a bead on it. Kind of saw where it was moving in and out from. It looked like branches swaying back and forth, but I kept watching it as I waited for more kids to come. The same shadows continued to dart in and out of my peripheral vision, but I paid it no mind. Tried to shake off that uneasy feeling, just attributing it to the adrenaline of the game and that eerie darkness around me. But then I saw it again, and this time it was not a fleeting shadow. It was a figure, a person, standing near a tree not too far away. My heart pounded in my chest as I squinted through the darkness, trying to make out any more details. It had to be a person because we were around the same size, same height, similar build. I mean, it was unmistakable. I thought about calling out for help, but realized it was probably another camp ranger, and I didn't want to blow our cover. Instead, I waited until it looked like he was looking my way. Then I put my arm up and waved. No response. I took a few steps over and tried again, but then I got an eye on him. The figure was really oddly dressed, their body draped in what looked like a torn burlap sack. Their head was covered with these white plastic bags, tied together in a makeshift mask. Their hands were bound, and they were on their knees. Their head was smacking rhythmically against the tree trunk. The sound echoed throughout the silent forest, a chilling sound in the heart of the wilderness. How have I not heard that before? This definitely looked like some crazy shit the camp leaders would do, but I knew I was wrong. I knew I didn't know this person. I watched him whack his head against the tree a few more times before I decided I should intervene. A shiver ran down my spine as I thought it was one of the leaders, pulling some kind of prank. Something felt off though. The figure was too still, too silent apart from that rhythmic thudding of their head against that tree. I called out, my voice echoing amongst the trees. Again, no response, just that thudding sound. I approached, my flashlight aimed directly at the figure. As I got closer, I could see the mud caked on their bare feet, the strange contortion of their bound hands. I called out once more, telling them to knock it off. The thudding suddenly stopped. The figure slowly rose to their feet, turning to face me, and I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The figure starts walking toward me, their movements slow and deliberate. Fear gripped me, a primal instinct screaming at me to run. I turned on my heel and sprinted back towards the camp, that figure's footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't dare look back, my mind filled with images of the strange and silent figure in the woods. Those plastic bags on his face. The whole thing was just beyond creepy. As I continued to sprint though, I could tell that he was no longer following me. After bursting out onto the trail and encountering a couple of campers, I took a look behind me and saw nobody, nothing. No sign of that person that I'd just seen before. This was relieving, but in this also fucked up way, it scared me even more. The fact that I didn't know where he was meant he could be anywhere, and that did not sit well with me. This was a true nightmare for the job I had, and I wasn't handling it well. I ushered the kids back at camp at a dead run through the woods. I burst into camp, gasping for breath. The others were there, huddled around the fire. I looked around, but everyone was accounted for. I told them about that figure and that strange encounter that I just had. They all laughed it off, thinking I was trying to scare them, but I know what I saw. Then I asked the kids I brought with me if they'd seen anything, and of course, they hadn't been with me during the run-in. They said no and further reinforced the idea that I was lying to them. I let it go. I was literally out of options. Just did my best to keep an eye on camp. Thank God nothing weird happened the rest of that night though. The next day I returned to the spot with another leader. The tree stood there, silent and imposing. There was something else. A small skinned rabbit was nailed to the tree, its lifeless eyes staring right at us. I called the police and they brushed it off as some kind of prank. They said college kids regularly went mushroom hunting up along the side of the mountain. They were known to go on psychedelic benders for days at a time. They got calls for half-naked people running around the woods every summer, especially in the area that we were in. The camp leaders had a good explanation too. There were other camps, obviously older age groups of children at our own camp. It was very possible that someone had come out specifically to mess with those 8 to 10-year-olds. The other camp, which was for troubled youth, was only a couple of miles down the road, so I guess it really wasn't out of the question. I know what I saw that night though, and I know that somewhere out there in that vast, unexplored wilderness, something or someone is lurking in the shadows. And just maybe, it's waiting for that next game night to come out and visit, plastic bags and all. I've spent years working as a ranger in the desert park. I've grown accustomed to the harsh conditions and eerie silence that comes with patrolling this unforgiving landscape. The park is a remote gem, offering breathtaking views that few other places can match. but it's not for the faint of heart. Temperatures soar during the summer months. The isolation can be overwhelming. That's why during the off-season, we only allow day visitors. It's just too dangerous for anyone to venture in alone, especially when the mercury rises. As a non-peace officer for the Ranger District, my days are usually filled with routine tasks: maintaining trails, monitoring the wildlife, and assisting the occasional lost hiker. But this particular summer, a few years ago, was very different. The heat was oppressive, even for a seasoned ranger like myself. It beat down relentlessly, making every step feel like a chore. My colleagues and I were restless, searching for anything to break that monotony. And that's when we received the reports. Multiple cars had been spotted entering and exiting the south side of the park, and some visitors claimed to be seeing masked individuals running along the roads. At first, we thought it was just some college kids filming a project or a group of thrill seekers looking for some kind of rush. But as those sightings continued, we couldn't shake the feeling something was off. Our supervisor, this grizzled old ranger named Alan, called a meeting to discuss the situation. We gathered around the map table, sipping at coffee and swapping theories. Some thought it might be a group of poachers. Others believed it was just a prank gone wrong. But Alan had a hunch that it was something more sinister. He proposed that we break into patrols, conduct a full survey of the park, and cover every trail and road to get to the bottom of this mystery. There were a lot of us in that off-season, so we had the manpower to conduct a thorough, top-to-bottom investigation of the park from one side to the other. We couldn't check every little back road, but by and by, we could see all the main drags and the intersections, parking lots and campgrounds, the places that would be able to house a lot of traffic, cars, and people. I was paired with my colleague Rachel, a no-nonsense ranger with a keen eye for detail. We set out in our truck, armed with water, snacks, and a healthy dose of skepticism. The sun beat down on us as we drove, the radio crackling with static as we ventured deeper into the park. Rachel and I had our own theories. I was convinced it was some kind of poaching scenario. The masks that were reported were just an image in my head. Guys in trucks and tailgates down to load up the kill, faces covered just in case we came upon them. There's a lot of game in these little valleys along the park: sheep, antelope, deer of all kinds. Rachel thought it was gang activity or some other nefarious situation. Neither of us had any evidence, but it was just what we talked about on the drive. As we patrolled, the silence was eerie. No birds seemed to be chirping, no insects were buzzing, just the hum of our engine and the soft crunch of gravel beneath our tires. We saw no other signs of life, no indication of what we were searching for, just the endless expanse of the desert, stretching out like an oven-baked canvas. We stopped at each trailhead, scanning the horizon for any sign of activity. Rachel checked the maps, keeping an eye out for anything that might attract the riffraff. I searched for any sign of recent human activity, footprints, tire tracks, anything that might give us a lead. Between the map and landscape, we were coming up dry. That being said, there were 20 teams looking over the lowlands. We were only searching one little part. Just because we didn't find anything didn't mean the same for the others. The hours ticked by, sun climbing higher in the sky. We still found nothing. No signs of life, no signs of trouble, just the desert, waiting patiently for us to uncover whatever was going on out here. After a while though, Rachel and I ran out of stuff to do. We were looping through the same trailheads, checking the same backways. There wasn't a sign of anything out there. We were starting to get hungry and low on fuel. We decided if we buzzed back to base, refuel ourselves and the truck, then maybe we could get orders for a different area. As we drove back to the station, the radio crackled to life. Alan's voice came through, his tone very serious.
All patrols be advised. We received another report of a masked individual, this time near the old mine shaft. Proceed with caution.
Rachel and I exchanged a look. This was getting serious. We hit the gas, our truck now speeding towards the mine shaft, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Alan sounded dreadful over the radio, so we really didn't know what to expect or what to think. As we arrived at the mine shaft, the other rangers were already scouring the area. their trucks parked haphazardly around the entrance. We joined the search, our eyes scanning the dusty terrain for any sign of these masked individuals. There's nothing. No sign of them. No sign of any recent human activity. Just the remnants of past visitors. Cigarette butts, spent shell casings, and all kinds of various litter. Still, it was creepy. The mine was this old derelict thing, dropped right into the top of the hillside. There was a wooden frame and a portion of the ladder that fed you straight into darkness. But beyond that, it was just collapsed. There might be little offshoots a person could hide in, but there was no way we were going down there to look for anybody that didn't need help. Rachel and I exchanged a look, our initial excitement dwindling now. It seemed our theory about college kids was correct. Some artistic project or prank, whatever the kids do. We were about to pack up and head back to the station when Alan called out. "Hold up, folks. Let's leave a pair of rangers behind to keep an eye on the place, just for a few hours, just in case." 2 rangers volunteered to stay behind. The rest of us loaded into our trucks and ready to head back to main base. As we came around a bend, a voice crackled over the radio. "We got a vehicle parked behind some rocks at the dog shit campground. Looks suspicious." We were coming down from the steep slope hill that mine was on. We had a great vantage point of the area on the south side of the park, including a couple of the outlying campgrounds. One of the rear rangers, while looking down off the cliff, just happened to spot a vehicle hiding at one of these campgrounds. Our convoy quickly reoriented. We began the long, slow descent down the hillside towards that campsite. This area was notorious for attracting undesirables, riffraff and troublemakers who thought they could escape the law by venturing into the park's furthest reaches. The campground was a hot spot for illegal activity. We approached it with caution. That's why we dubbed it the dog shit campground. There was always some dog shit going on out there. It was usually harmless, but still, you could never be too sure. There's stories of tweakers and all manner of whack jobs squatting on those fringes. As we entered the campsite, our eyes scanned the area, taking in the scattered trash and abandoned gear. The car was parked behind a cluster of rocks, partially hidden from view. We spread out, our boots crunching on the gravel as we began to investigate. The first thing that we noticed, the car was inoperable. It was white and black, burned out so bad that nothing remained. None of us wanted to approach. Obviously, something seriously illegal was going on. Alan immediately called in the local sheriff's department, requested deputies on the scene right away. Then he sent a pair of us back to the district building so they could lead the lawmen back to the scene of whatever crime that we just discovered. The air was heavy with this ominous silence, the only sound of creaking trees and the distant hum of a fly buzzing around our heads. Rachel and I walked the perimeter, our eyes scanning the ground for any sign of any activity. The sun continued to beat down on us, casting these long shadows across the dusty terrain. Again, nobody wanted to approach that car, so we just putzed around, looked for any other clues. There were more casings and a big chopping log that had some cuts in it, as well as some dark staining. We really didn't know what to make of that. Every step just seemed like this slow motion nightmare, as if we were being watched by unseen eyes. The trees looming over us, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snatch us. I just couldn't shake that feeling that we were walking into some kind of trap, that something or someone was waiting for us just out of sight. As we approached the car, I noticed it was old, rusted, and covered with this thick layer of dust. The windows were blown out, leaving long jagged shards like teeth in the frame. I tried the door handle, melted in place. Rachel and I exchanged another look, our instincts screaming at each other that something was off. We began to circle the car, searching for any signs of forced entry or exit. And that's when I saw it. What looked like a head resting in the front seat. I froze in place, just kind of hollered for everyone to freeze. Everyone did, and Alan slowly creeped up to my side. My heart began to race as I called out to the others. "We got something here." "What is it, man? Quit screaming," Alan instructed me, I pointed down to what I was looking at. Alan peeked over my shoulder and sucked in a breath and then took a few steps back. He could see a little more than I could. Just one more step was all it took. I could see the corpse for what it was. Not just burned to a crisp, but methodically dissected like a frog on a 6th grade science lab table. It was hard to tell what was what, but it looked like someone had chopped the guy apart. We all retreated from the car and tried to calm ourselves down, but at this point, we were desperate for the sheriff to arrive. That was at least an hour out. I wish I could say that we got answers and relief that we desired when the law got there. They taped it off and started taking photos. But when we explained the body and when they saw it, their entire demeanor seemed to change. They dismissed us, said they would reach out if they had any further questions. When we came back to check on the scene the next day, that vehicle was gone, as well as all the trash from the area. We got the official report a few weeks later. All of us were stunned. The conclusion was suicide. The man had been seatbelted into the vehicle and then set it on fire. But before that, someone had laid him out and removed his arms and legs with a wood chopping axe. Probably the chopping log that we saw with that dark stains on top. So how did he cut his own limbs off, climb into the car, put a seatbelt on, and then light it on fire? Alan, the lead for the district, said there was a lot of illegal drug trafficking in the area. It had to be related to that. No other scenario made sense. It also made sense why the sheriffs weren't too keen to investigate. There wasn't going to be any leads or breakthroughs in a case like this. This was a make or break experience for our department that year. A lot of people moved on to different parks, different occupations altogether. Murder at the edge of the world wasn't in the job description, and a lot of us felt like we were moments away from walking into our own deaths that day. Not me though. I stuck with the district and still work in that unforgiving desert to this day. I have a lot of cool and weird stories, but this is definitely the darkest thing to ever happen on the job.